let me talk about some case studies that I hope generate more conversation and are a way that I can tie all of this together for you. And what I want you to do when I'm talking about these is pay attention, because we try and make these workshops interactive. So I'm going to ask you what the selling price was for these companies. I'm going to give you all the data you need, and then I'm going to ask you, and I've done this 3 or 4 times before and was amazed by how accurate the average answer was. And so this is kind of an experiment. So these are the ones where I have got the data that I can share. Again, fairly rare. They're all up on my blog. Parasun is a Canadian company that provided high-speed internet over cable TV to about 140 communities here in the US. And I invested $500,000 in this company in April 2004 at a $3.4 million valuation, which was 40 cents a share. At that point, the revenues were about $3.8 million, and they had about a $500,000 profit. And my angel fund later also invested at 55 cents a share in about a year after that. So everybody got that kind of snapshot of the entry valuation and how much I had invested? So about a $3.4 million, and then later about a $4 million pre-money valuation. And I was into this one pretty deep. And because I really liked the company and the team, I came on, I was the chairman there. And we had a process where we set a target exit price at the 2005 strategic planning retreat. This is where we went away for a whole weekend just to agree on the exit strategy. And the plan that we developed was to sell the company in 2.5 to 3 years, which would have been late 2006 or 2007. And most of the work that we had to do was on growing the business. The business wasn't, the CEO didn't think it was as far along as he could get it, which is one of the reasons that it was out 2.5 to 3 years. But this was a good example, I think, of planning it far enough in advance, knowing where you're going, even though it was 2.5 to 3 years before we wanted it to happen. So the process started in the fall of 2005. At that point, the revenues were $8.2 million. Profit had grown to $781K on a 30% growth rate. It had 10 million shares, just to calibrate that share price in case you're remembering that. We approached 100 buyers and shortlisted 10. And we had several bidders through the final stages. And in January of 2007, we sold the company for 48% more than the target price. So we did exactly what we talked about. We got 48% more than we were planning to. Almost all of that was simply because there was multiple bidders. It wasn't so strategic. This was a company that provided high-speed internet over cable. And so the question I have for you is, with that data, which I'll leave on the screen, what was the selling price? And I'm talking about the gross selling price. Don't think about the transaction fees or anything, but what was the price that we sold this company for? Pretty much exactly on the timeline that we set 2.5 to 3 years earlier. It was doing $8.2 million, $750,000 in profit, 30% growth rate. I'm going to give you like 1 minute, then I'm just going to ask for numbers to be, we're just going to call it out because we're going to move quickly here. I know it's great fun. And I'm already signaling it was a good price because it was 48% more than the goal that we set at that 2005 strategic planning retreat.
And the revenues were 8.2 in 2007?
Yes, at around the time that we sold it, the revenues were 8.2 and the profit was $750,000. And it was growing, it was growing at 30%. So it's not a rocket ship. It's still a good. Anybody want to guess?
48 million.
48.
37.
37.
18.
18. 13. What was 80?
58.
58. It's a high-speed internet provider.
What'd you say, 140? Oh, 22.
Did you say 14? 14. Jeepers. There's definitely been inflation. The last group I asked, The average was about 15, and we got 14.8. But 14.8 is like 20 times earnings. Right? That's the kind of thing you talk about for a public company. So 2 times revenue. This is not a very, this is not a technology-rich company. Yeah. Well, that's a really good point. And what happened next, I think, is really interesting. So the strategy and execution worked really well in this case. And this was a public company that bought it. So again, we found out what happened afterwards. But the Parasun shareholders had no idea how lucky they were, because within 2 months of that exit, the company's fortunes had turned down dramatically. And 6 months after the exit, it wasn't profitable anymore. And what happened was something that everyone on the Parasun board, which included me, had missed, was that the company hadn't adequately assessed or hedged against the currency risk. So this was a Canadian company selling to US customers. And almost all of their revenue was in US dollars, and all their expenses were in Canadian dollars. And if you go back and look at what happened, within 2 months, the currency moved a historically large amount and completely wiped out the profit. So one of the things that I learned a few years ago now was just how critical the timing was. And this was again, luck. There is no skill involved in predicting the move in the currency. But it really gave me an appreciation for just how fast things can change. And in this case, how darn lucky all of us shareholders were. And I feel bad about the public company that bought them, because they hadn't hedged the currency either, and took a big hit on this. They ultimately did sell it for more, though, which made me feel a bit better about it. Yeah.
So, I've been trying to reconcile this for a little bit in the discussion, right? And I'm kind of a fan of a bird in the hand and work in the bush, right? And so, to sort of say you have an unsolicited offer and then you should start a process that could take 12 to 18 months on the very aggressive side, you could be missing an opportunity.
You are absolutely correct. And that's...
If you had waited, you would never have had, that currency, I lived that currency exchange risk on a different endeavor. But, if you could have missed it, right? There's no value left in the company at all.
Yes, you're absolutely right. In the Vineyard case, for example, it was an unsolicited single offer. And we had a lot of conversation about whether we should move forward with that or not. Now, nothing bad happened to Vineyard, but you're right, you can't tell. Nobody can predict these things. And so it's a decision that the shareholders and the board have to make. And it's a very, very hard decision, because there's no way you can have all of the data. And I'm with you. I like a bird in the hand any day. So part of the reason that I say the things I do is I think we should be making it happen more often. I think when things are going well and the entrepreneurs aren't thinking about it because everything's going well, they're having fun, a lot of times that's the best time to be thinking about selling the company.
Can you give us a sense as what this cost overall, including accounting, legal, and M&A and all? To give us a sense of scale?
It was exactly what I was saying earlier. It was in the accounting fees. In this case, they've been doing good accounting. I'd have to check my actual records, but under 100,000 for accounting, and legal's probably 150. I'm guessing, again, from memory. Let me give you another example. Brightside was a company, again, from my backyard, because that's where I have the best case studies, and that's where I occasionally get one I can talk about, was a spin-out from the University of British Columbia's Applied Optics Lab. And this was a technology to make liquid crystal displays brighter and have higher contrast. And that's a big market. We're talking about big screen TVs, computer laptops, cell phones, big, big market. And the biggest of all was this big screen TV market, which was the reason I got excited about it in the first place. And when I invested, it was 2 people in one of those shared university offices. And they had this really small, grainy prototype. And I said, okay, I'll put $100,000 in at a $3.2 million pre-money valuation, which, if you're following share price, was $2.33 a share. Not that that's important. But if you can show me a bigger prototype, I'll put more money in. They did, I did, twice more. And the second time, it was not that much of a jump. But the third time, I said, okay, if you can show me a 36-inch commercial screen that you bought and then change. This was a backlighting technology. Then I'll put more money in. And that last $100,000 that I put in was at a $12 million pre-money valuation. And this was in June 04, October 04, and then August 05. So you can see there's a much bigger time gap between the second and third investments. And each time I kept challenging them with, if you do this, then I'll do that kind of thing. And in total, this company raised $7 million from angels. And it did include one brokered round it was under an offering memorandum that was placed with angels in Europe, which was a kind of an unusual thing that I hadn't seen done before. Raymond James was who actually did that. I don't think they would do it again because it wasn't a very successful piece of business for them, but a very unusual thing to see a brokered angel round. And what was interesting in this case is this company, the founders all wanted to build a factory. They really believed in this technology. But the angels in this company would not accept a different class of shares from the VCs than the angels bought. The angels all bought commons. And the VCs would not invest in the common shares. And I know this because I was an angel fund in this thing. So they kept coming, the VCs all came, the company kept sending them to me for due diligence. And so I could talk about the technology in the company all day long. And we had mostly conversations about structure. So in the end, they couldn't raise any money from VCs. And that last angel round, the one that was brokered in Europe, at a $12 million pre, that's getting up there. It's getting hard to get angels to write checks at a $12 million valuation pre-revenue. So without the capital, they could not put the company into production. They were still in R&D. They had no revenues. They had 8 patents and 3.1 million shares if you're counting them, but that's not important. So the strategy that the company developed was to sell to a large Asian consumer electronics manufacturer. That's obvious. Who makes big screen TVs? We'll go and sell to those guys. But interestingly, Dolby Labs ended up acquiring the company. That's one of those examples of the CEO would never have guessed. And the CEO, and Dolby acquired them in February 07. So 2.75 years after I invested, but still pre-revenue and really no pre-production prototype. Like prototypes, but nothing you could yet put into production. Like it wasn't done to a way that you could manufacture it. So my question again is, how much did Brightside sell for? Pre-revenue, so much harder question. You're right. 18, 20, 12, 15. Dolby is a company whose actual business is licensing technology. They started out in the audio business, but they don't build anything. They just license technology. So Dolby bought it because they thought, we're good at licensing technology. Interesting twist that you don't see very often. Okay, I'm hearing mid to higher teens. What else? Anybody else want to? 20. 25. 22. 24. 8. So this is an interesting thing. So this often happens in investing. Your first guess was high, so now you're undercompensating. The answer was 28. 28 million pre-revenue sold to Dolby. What makes this case study interesting, I think, is what happened next. And what happened next was that literally a couple of weeks after this sale to Dolby, I was in Best Buy trying to convince myself that I needed an even bigger screen TV. I didn't have anywhere to put a bigger one, but my wife was shopping in the mall, and I was in there, and I was looking at these things. And every time I'd invested in Brightside, I went in and did some real diligence. And I had gotten pretty good at understanding what made their technology different. I could see it, because they always had a traditional backlight in one of theirs. And so here I am in Best Buy, and I'm going like this, and I'm looking at these things, and I'm thinking, darn, I'm looking at their technology right on the shelf 2 weeks after the transaction closed. And so what I did is I was on the showroom floor. I'm kind of bored because my wife is shopping. I called up the COO, who's a good friend of mine at this point, and I said, and before I got the question out, he said, let me stop you and tell you what you're going to ask me next. He says, you're in Best Buy and you're looking at, and I can't tell you the name of the manufacturer because I'm too afraid of them, but it was a big Asian display manufacturer that they had actually shown the technology to, trying to get a licensing deal done. Their strategy wasn't pure. They thought, well, let's either license it or sell it to a big Asian electronics manufacturer. And this was the story I promised to tell earlier to the question of, well, how do you not disclose the technology? So they went over there with the very best NDA that they could get. They spent a lot of time with expensive lawyers saying, this is scaring us to death. We need a really good NDA because we're going to show them enough so that we can have a conversation about a licensing deal.
This is the company
Yeah.
you invested in.
Yes. The company I invested in wanted to try and negotiate a licensing deal, wanted to go and have that conversation with a big manufacturer, wanted the very best NDA money could buy, and got it signed. And near as we can figure out, because we knew who the company was now, because there it is on the shelf. In fact, now it's in my home because it's a really great product. But the risk that they missed is that this big electronics manufacturer did what is so common today. They took that technology and they moved it, I'm sure, to production the same week. Because it just takes a certain amount of time to tool up. You got to build it, you got to put it on a boat, you got to get it through Best Buy's distribution, you got to put it up on the shelf. And it was a fraction of a year. There's no question they didn't delay. They didn't even, in good faith, start the negotiation on the licensing fee. They just took the technology, put it into production. And this happens all the time. And the reason is that these big companies now, and I don't want to single out Asian companies, even though there are different cultural values around intellectual property. But this is not just Asian, it's big companies in general. Their attitude about small companies is, number one, we cannot afford to wait. We have to put it into production. Number two, these guys are rookies. We'll never get to a fair licensing deal with them. Number three, yeah, they're going to sue us, but we have, in the case of this company, over 400 lawyers on staff, working full-time, salaried lawyers. The lawyers will figure it out. That's what the predominant attitude of large companies is here in America and in other parts of the world. I've got lots of stories like this. The good news was Dolby, thank goodness, first of all, had written the check a couple of weeks before. What I heard from the company is Dolby put 40 lawyers, 40 people, most of them lawyers, on a plane just to go and have the first visit. So the first salvo was 40 lawyers on a plane. Can you imagine if the company that I invested in trying to put 40 lawyers on a plane? It would have bankrupted the company. But that's how these things are played out. And it's the whole part of this exit strategy, the whole part of the exit strategy conversation, which we don't have time for today, is, and I've got a talk, you can find it on my website. The title of the talk is, Got a Good Patent? Sell the Company.
And the line, the disclosure technology to this company, was there a mistake made at that level? Would it have been possible to not disclose what they disclosed, which allowed it to get on the shelf technically?
No mistake.
No.
The mistake was not appreciating the risk, which was your question. And I think that's why it makes no sense for a company that has a good patent not to sell the company. It's a bad business decision. So if you have portfolio companies with good patents, for heaven's sakes, get them sold. Because as soon as you disclose that technology, you start a risk, which is unknowable, unquantifiable, and usually fatal. Because once you're infringed, you cannot afford to defend. And the big companies know that. And if you're an angel-backed company, they will steal the technology left, right, and center and not even feel bad about it.
What if you have a patent and a trade secret, which is hard to replicate? In that case, no? You still
Maybe.
that hard?
But let me do one more quick case study, and then we can have that conversation if you're interested later. But that transaction would not have happened if it was 2 weeks later. It's one of the scariest ones I've ever been part of, even though I didn't realize it at the time. Last case study, and then we'll wrap up after this. A company in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. A good example of what I was talking about companies being everywhere now. There's tech anywhere people want to live. Coeur d'Alene's beautiful. This one, the CEO and chairman went to one of my exit strategies workshops in November 2010. And before they came to the workshop, they weren't sure if they were going to finance the company to production, license the technology, or work towards an early exit. Exactly like the previous example, looking at all three options. This company made thin keyboards. A couple of very bright engineers believed they could build a thinner keyboard. And they wanted to build something that gave better tactical feedback and be ultra thin and work on a touch screen. It was all angel financing, $4 million raised before they had an exit strategy. And this is another thing that could have been done better. I think you want to get the exit strategy and then raise the money, but that's the exit strategies workshop. They needed one more round to fund the exit, and in total about $6 million was invested. And they did 3 pivots. And we all know to angels, pivot means the idea failed completely, now you need more money. Anyway, so the first 2 didn't really work out. And they expected the product to be ready for production by the end of 2012. So it still wasn't a pre-production prototype. And they were acquired in August 2012, even before that pre-production prototype. And my question is going to be again, what were they acquired for? And my hint again, and more momentum behind this idea of getting 50% more, the final price, like it was with Vineyards, like it was with Parasun, was 50% more than the first offer. So somebody offered them something, and they closed 50% higher. And so my question for you is, what was the final selling price? And it's going to be, there's no more information that you need because there's no more data that can go into it other than they had a prototype of a really cool thin keyboard. And they were acquired. Anybody want to guess? They raised $6 million in total. And it was scaling up to about $5 or $6 million. 12? 18? 15? 18? 25? 18? I hear. Anybody else? 20? What was that one? 23? It was 30. You guys got spooked by that first bad experience. Interesting. Let me just finish the story off here. So we got Pacinian is a happy ending. The board distributed the cash to the shareholders. Everybody was very happy. The risk here was that it took the chairman and I about a year to convince the board. The risk here, the thing that almost didn't happen was a lot of the board didn't believe it was possible to sell a pre-revenue company without a prototype. And the founders actually wanted to build a factory. They were engineers. They had this vision in their mind of this thing running down a production line. They got to realize that vision, but it wasn't on their angels' capital investment dollar. And so the thing that fascinates me is, they had thought about all 3 of the classic choices. They had venture capital offers. They even had licensing offers. And in the end, this was really hard. The board at times felt like one of those negotiations I talked about where people get quite angry. And there was actually quite angry words spoken at this board about this whole idea. Because people believed passionately. There were some people that thought the venture capital is right there, good valuation, not as good as the exit valuation, by the way, but good valuation. We should take some capital, we should build a bigger company. There was other people who thought that they should license it, because again, they had licensing offers with prepayments. And it was really hard to get a consensus. And we needed to. We had to have an alignment on that exit strategy. Otherwise, when we got to the part of the process where they had to approve it, we would have had the same argument later. So we did the right thing. We continued with the board discussion, which really was representative of all the shareholders, until we had alignment. and then we started the process.
Do they have IP? Do they have patents?
Yes, they had about 6 patents. And that's what really made the difference. And in this case, it was Johnny Humphreys, the chairman, who believed. He was the one that swung the rest of the board over. You know, he didn't think it was possible before he came to the workshop. One of the things that gets me on an airplane to come and do more workshops is that I think it made a difference. And these were good people. I mean, none of these board members were inexperienced. They were all experienced investors or the founders. And most of them had never even heard of a company that sold pre-revenue. Like I was off, they'd ask me, okay, tell us all the companies you've ever heard of in history that were sold pre-revenue. And I'd do that and they still wouldn't be convinced because it's not that many. And so for me, I often wonder what would have happened, you know, and we'll never know. This is what's so challenging about the work that we do is there is no database. This isn't one of 10 case studies like this. This is an anecdotal observation, a single case where we know what happened here. I think they made the right decision, but you know, this is what we have to do. We have to use our limited knowledge. We have to use what we learn from meetings like this to help the entrepreneurs, to guide the companies, and hopefully get to a larger percentage of successful exits, even though some of the people, in this case at least, thought it was impossible. And this is a great example of how the inefficient market worked to their advantage. Johnny Humphreys was one of the most fun guys I've ever worked with. He had no fear. By the way, part of the reason is, and he wouldn't mind me telling you this, it's public knowledge. I think it's in a video on my website. He had just done battle with cancer and won. And I think fighting cancer off gives you kind of a courage that's not, it's hard to replicate. So we had quite a few offers at 20 million. And as Johnny describes it on the video on my blog, we knew we could do better than that because we had quite a few offers, more than we needed. So we thought, let's go to 25. Went back to the board, big fight because nobody wanted to say no to the bird in the hand at 20 to maybe get 25. Got to 25, all the buyers howled and screamed. Some of them cried foul. Still more than one bidder at 25. So Johnny and I looked at each other and he said, you think? And I said, yeah, I think. We can go to 30. And he says, are you sure? So then it was a little bit, you know, he wasn't sure. I said, yes, 30. Go back to the board. They're terrified of this idea. They can't believe this is bad. Don't listen to Basil Peters. You know, he's a bad guy and out of his mind, trying to get a case study. Anyway, in the end, he went back and there was one bidder left at 30 and no talk about trying to go higher than that. And the buyer was Synaptic. I mean, everybody who's got a laptop's got a Synaptic driver driving the touchpad or whatever. And so, you know, it wasn't a crazy person that thought it was worth 30. It was a very, you know, high quality NASDAQ listed company, which is why we can talk about the price again because it was a public acquirer. Paid $30 million. Everybody's happy. The engineers are now building their thin keyboard in large quantities. We don't know how many they're building or what the value was because it's all swallowed up in the big Synaptic financials, but a very happy outcome. And all of these are available on my blog. And I think that we're finishing just about exactly a minute early. A couple more questions in the last minute.
So I'm doing the math on your examples. None of them I had a 10x for the angels, right? We sort of always sort of say that's a target. I'm not saying these are bad exits, right? But you know, so is that a hurdle to overcome with investors?
You know, some of them were. You bring up a really, really good point. And some of the angels did get a 10x in Vineyard, because the earlier rounds were lower than, they got more than 10. Synaptic, Pacinian, same thing, some of them got 10. But you're right, on average, it was not a 10x. You're absolutely correct. And this is something that really worries me personally in light of the latest Halo report, which you're all going to be hearing about here at the summit. They debuted it at the Northwest Regional Conference. And what's quite concerning to me is that the pre-money valuations across the whole country have gone from 3 million a year ago to 4.5 million. So we've seen a 50%, I know, doing that, 50% increase. So I think understanding the market for M&A, which is very good, but these are good transactions.
No, I'm not saying they're great transactions.
you have to ask yourself, what valuation can we afford to invest at?
The other thing I just want to mention, I mean, just a show of hands of people in the room, how many have gotten an exit at more than once that's greater than 10? We all want it. Oh, there's one.
Our group did.
There's one. More than one. So this was one. I invest, we all invest blindly, but those are so rare that they just don't happen.
I think the deal is you invest so that it had the potential.
Sure,
But over the
absolutely.
portfolio, you
Absolutely.
get 27%, you're like, sight.
Right, no, exactly. Yeah, you have to think it's gonna, you can get.
But these
So
are
you just
actual
look at,
exits.
you look at these exits, right, they're all under 30 million, right? And when the average is 4.5 now for free money, right, or valuation with the seed stage, it just, the math doesn't work.
Well,
We're elevating the early.
Yeah, that's a valuation
too much,
problem,
right.
not an exit problem.
You are correct. The math does not work.
Yeah.
So it might be that right now, at this point in history, maybe it's more important to be attending the exits workshop than the valuation and entry workshops. Last question.
One case study, you grew the company first before pursuing an exit, and in the other one, you sold before revenue. So how did you make that choice? Like, how do you know when to grow versus when to push back?
Boy, that's a really good question. I mean, having lived through all of those stories, there's no easy answer. A lot of it came down to what did the shareholders want to do? In the case of the company that we grew, the team wanted to grow the company. Part of what we had to do to get alignment, we had to buy out some of the investors. So money had to change hands to get alignment, because there were some people that said, I want to sell now. This is a good time. Let's sell. And they were right. And other people, the CEO argued very strongly, I can grow this thing. I can make it much bigger. And he did. And so the solution was money changing hands.
And in the second one, the CEO made the same argument, but you didn't listen. So what made you not listen to him?
People thought the risk was too high. They are also right. It's a fascinating conversation. It's what gets me excited. If I can ever help with some thoughts or opinions about any of the companies you're thinking about exiting, I'm here for the balance of the work event, and usually available at these things. Or just send me an email. Let me know you're in one of the exits workshops. The last thing I'm going to ask before you leave is please fill out the evaluation form, which is coming around now. This is really important. It's in the workbook. It's really important feedback for us. It's how we know how to make it better for the next audience. And you're sitting here benefiting from many other angels who filled that form in before. So we'd ask you to pay it back and pay it forward by just telling us candidly what you think and giving us your evaluation. And high evaluations are always appreciated, of course. Oops. Not to bias the process, but really do want to know what you think. And Una will take those on the way out. Please. And I'll stick around, by the way, if there's other questions. We can keep, people who want to go can go. If there's questions, come on up or just yell them out. I'm always happy to help. Huge. Thank you. Thank you very much.